Welcome to the ZNL Podcast, a podcast brought to you by ZN, the OG digital agency in Brussels.
Hello and welcome to ZNL. Today I am so excited to have a fantastic guest, Ryan Heath. Ryan, how are you today?
I'm doing very well. I'm coming to you from Canberra in Australia, so it's my night, but I am doing very well.
That's fantastic. So Ryan has obviously been around the world. He's an experienced journalist. He's focused on Brussels policy. He was a co-founder of POLITICO Europe, as well as an expert in policy before that. And he's been across different lenses. But one of the things I am really excited about is that he was our first influencer who was leading the ranking for the first time and then several years in succession. Now we're looking back at a decade of influence. So I just want to kind of, take you back in that moment when you were in Brussels. So what was journalism then, and what was Twitter for you then?
Oh, well, journalism was very different. And I have that perspective now, having operated in a few markets. But the first time I really worked as a full-time journalist was in Brussels. And I had been a spokesperson at the Commission before that. So I'd been dealing with journalists a lot for the previous 3 years. And what really struck me was the way that the journalists were these sort of isolated outposts in their publications, and that there really wasn't anything that kind of like really deeply looked at the European Union without taking a somehow partisan or pro or against position on the European Union. So the European voice, was pretty good, but very clearly pro-EU. And the EU Observer seemed to me to be pretty Eurosceptical. And there wasn't anyone saying, hey, we take the EU seriously enough to like really invest here and make it the focus of our publication without taking a particular side, let's say. And so that was really the gap in the market that Politico tried to fill. And in a sense, I don't want to say it was easy. A lot of people thought we were going to fail. But we were doing something that no one had really done before. And it was amazing that in 60 years of the EU, no one had really managed to do that or thought to do that. So very different world. It's now a much more competitive media landscape. I think we have a much more nuanced view of the EU's successes and flaws and strengths now after Brexit and a lot of the other traumas of the past decade. And then Twitter, I used to love Twitter so much. Like, it was just such a good community. And when you invited me on the podcast, I was thinking about how people would literally do things like tweet ups, and people in the Brussels Twitter community kind of did literally all know each other, and it was an actual conversation. And it just makes me so sad that it is not like that now, and that it's just become this terrible cesspit. And I don't know, I don't really feel like LinkedIn replaces what that original Twitter/X was, and I haven't found the scale anywhere else. So I cling to my useless Twitter following now because, it doesn't matter. I can say whatever I want to them and I would only get 2 retweets, and that is ridiculous. That's not about me. Like, I haven't suddenly become a completely different person. I say the same sorts of things I said 10 years ago, and now I get 2 retweets for them. So, that's just sad.
Yeah, I want to come back to Twitter/X in a second, but to stay with it 10 years ago, when Politico was launched, and at the same time, one of the things that you mentioned, some of this now, is that this was about also focusing on people and emotion and making the European conversation more interesting, more controversial. Which if you think about it, there's some similarities with social media. And so you were successful using your Twitter account then and bringing that. So do you think that Politico was kind of hitting the zeitgeist at that moment by, humanizing the EU? And was it also because social media was moving the conversation into that space?
Yeah, it was a lot of different things. So it is exactly what you just described. We were, in a sense, one of the original digital publications, at least the original Washington-focused digital publication. So getting that very specific kind of political times social sort of intersection, that was something that we really benefited from. At the same time, I think the EU had really focused on processes rather than personalities for a long time, and saw somehow that it was more substantial or meaningful to focus on the ideas and the pieces of paper rather than the people behind them. But that's not how most people think about the world or their relationships or their political positions. So I do think we helped to humanize that. There was just also an extraordinary series of back-to-back problems and crises right when Politico began. Like almost from the first moment, you had like Greece falling apart and the edge of bankruptcy. Then you had the Syrian migrant crisis. Then you had the Paris attacks, the Brussels attacks, Brexit. Like it just went on and on for the first 2 years of Politico. So there was always something for us to talk about that the rest of the world needed to understand. And sort of English language people in particular found us as a connecting point to sort of explain this confusing block set of institutions or place where all these tragedies were happening. And so, you know, some of it was about how we did the journalism, and some of it had nothing to do with us. It was just we happened to be there at the right time. But if you don't practice your craft with diligence, if you're not open-minded to new ways of practicing your craft, then you miss opportunities like what was presented to us in 2015 and 2016. So we do take some credit as well.
Yeah, and I think there was some quality with some personality brought together to get that exciting thing.
One more really important thing is, and I take a bit of personal credit for this, is that I think there was this sort of pyramid system of understanding the EU, or gatekeeping around who was allowed to talk about the EU back 10, 12 years ago. And so, you know, you mattered a lot more if you were Germany and France. You mattered more if you were EPP. You mattered more if you'd been around for 20 years and went to the College of Europe, etc. And I was really proud to crack open some of the conversation so that people who came from different backgrounds or didn't want to wait 20 years for their voice to be heard, or they worked in the consultancy arm of the town instead of the institutions. Like I tried to create a world and a community and a platform where all of those voices could be heard, not just we all bow down to the German CDU or something like that. So, you know, I don't know how much impact I had, but I worked really hard to do that, and I think it had some impact.
Yeah, and I think the conversation in Brussels is much more about people who have personal brands and personal stories, sometimes purposefully, sometimes organically. And you mentioned Twitter at the time, and as you said, there were these tweet ups, people coming together, exchanging ideas. And I think what I'd like to know is, did you feel at the time, how important did you feel Twitter was? Because you were very good at it. You got traction. We obviously, saw that you were getting, some of the most engagement on key topics, obviously connected to your role at Politico. But did you feel that it was kind of a small group of nerds who were like really excited about it, or were these already the kind of emerging influencers on the conversation, which, I think now everybody recognizes, of course, that social media and Twitter was a major player. But at that time, 10 years ago, it wasn't that clear. I remember our first meetings, as you said, you could just go to a bar and meet people with a lot of followers on their account. So what did you see it as? Did you use it deliberately, or you just liked it and then it turned into something bigger than it was?
It was both. I mean, like, I think when you're trying to do something that is about building a community, and that's how I saw the playbook, then you need to be a good retail politician. You need to go out and, not that there are voters, but you need to go out and talk to the subscribers. You can't just go and sit in your little ivory tower and write the newsletter and think people are going to care. So it's not that I saw the tweet up people as my fans necessarily, but I did see them as my peers or my community. And some people did like the idea of meeting people who were in interesting positions, whether it was me or Jen Baker and people like that. So I did take it very seriously, but it was a little world at the same time. It's not, I think it's very hard to know when you're in some kind of scene that people will think about or talk about 10 years later. It's not always obvious at the time. But I look at what the people there went on to do, and they all went on to have much more influential positions than they had when they would get together for those meetings. And they went to do really significant things in building out sort of institutional social media strategies. For example, people built whole consultancy lines, yourself included, around being able to offer that advice and support to others. And some of that comes out of being that community. And so you can never know at the time, but that's why you should always invest in other people. You should take a gamble. Like you never know what's going to come of something. But nothing will come of it if you never turn up and you never go and sort of offer a coffee to a person or do them a favor. Like that's how ecosystems come into being. And it was a really good one.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. And that ecosystem was very much anchored around Twitter. Now, Twitter has had a pretty chaotic trajectory from this, I would say, very enthusiastic community of people in Brussels who were not that self-aware, I think, at the time. I think they really liked it. They were passionate about the topics, but I don't think they saw themselves as necessarily driving agendas. I think they really cared about them. And then, over the last decade, I think there's been a moment when suddenly people said, okay, this thing is really powerful. Obviously, Trump was, a kind of expression of the power of this tool to challenge the media. And what I'd like to know is, what is your kind of little quick analysis of where Twitter went from being this, let's say, the community you loved and you enjoyed, to this tool of power, and to perhaps this cesspit that you describe right now?
Well, I can't know for sure, but I see it in some of the way Meta has exercised influence over its algorithms as well. It's really about the rise of the algorithm. And I don't want to say that everything was pure and perfect sort of 10 or 15 years ago, but I had been doing Twitter since 2009. And for anyone listening who doesn't, or watching who doesn't know, I was kind of like Neelie Kroes's voice on Twitter. And she was really the most active commissioner on Twitter. And she was the leading edge of doing all that work inside the commission. So, when the commission was being dragged to be more modern, it was me doing the dragging. And so I got to experience the actual Twitter officials and team, sort of as a person that might have to meet them at conferences around the world. I experienced the way an elected official gets treated on the platform as a user, as a VIP. And then I got to had to build it all myself, but was also attached to a global brand. So I saw lots of different aspects of it. And over time, it just became a much more manipulated sort of way of communicating. And, we saw that when Facebook stopped just being a chronological feed of all your friends' updates, and people started trying to decide based on past behavior what you might like to watch and read, and then try and insert sponsored content and And it's the same sorts of things with Twitter. And then I think under Elon Musk, it just actually became quite political. Like, I just get shown the most ridiculous nonsense that I have no interest in. I've never shown any interest in it. There's no track record of me trying to look at that stuff. And then it just gets shoved in my face. And it's just, for a person who claimed to not want political interference in a platform, he does a really good job at shoving it in everyone's faces. And I don't know who uses it, but no one I know uses it. It is a place where content is still made available, but it is not a place where conversations occur. Like, it's just strange and makes me sad.
So what you're saying is very interesting, because you could argue that you helped to transform the commission's entire communication strategy, and then moved into journalism and transformed the entire media scene by bringing these new ideas to both the media and the institutions. So
I was there at both sort of changes. It's true.
Now, in terms of X, there's been a recurrent debate, which is people saying, I have to leave the platform. It's toxic. It's terrible. We've had that discussion at the EU influencer meeting. Some people saying, I leave. And then some people actually saying, I'm half leaving and then staying, because it's still where politicians post things. Journalists still go there for breaking stories. And the center of gravity has moved to LinkedIn. People are still trying Mastodon, Blue Sky. There's a new platform coming up, which we'll have to see if it gains any traction. So what is your now? You said you called it a cesspit, so I'm assuming you're not embracing it. Do you think of leaving the platform? Are you unable to do it, like somebody trapped in a toxic relationship? And how do you feel about LinkedIn or other places where you find some kind of community?
Yeah, I mean, I basically shifted to LinkedIn to the extent that I still do social media, and I realize there are a lot of flaws in that. Like, it is, it's not a cesspit, but it is a site of AI nonsense. Like, there's just so many boring people with nothing to say on LinkedIn, and they're determined to say it in a very long-winded fashion. And if I read one more post about someone being humbled by something that's got nothing to do with being humble, like, I will scream. So I'm not happy on LinkedIn. But I haven't been able to quit X either, and that's purely ego-based. I have 77,000 followers still, even after all the people left and all the bots and everything got cleaned out. Now, like I said earlier on in the podcast, do I get any engagement from them? Are any of those people actually looking at their own accounts? No, but it would just feel stupid to shut the account down, so I don't. But then I've got 59 followers on Blue Sky, and I don't want to spend 10 years of my life building that up again. And I probably should care more about TikTok, but I kind of don't get it in the way that young people do get it. So I've become this old person now who's just kind of like stuck in the middle of lots of things. And I'll just have to get over myself because we're launching Politico in Australia in 5 weeks. I don't have choice. I got to get out there and start talking to people and figure it out. And I personally just use Instagram more, like at a personal level. I like it visually. I collect all my nonsense, amazing shipping container cabin ideas for my retirement, and I get very happy with that.
That's very interesting. So I want to go to journalism and the shift of journalism, since you're about, as you said, you're about to launch. So the question is, of course, every study is showing us that people are moving from traditional to social media, and that most people, young and old, are now starting to get their news from TikTok, Instagram, social media. So what does that mean for journalism, and what's the added value? And then a lot of journalists, Dave Keating included, Tara Palmieri, are becoming their own brand and are building their own story. So where do you think the future of journalism lies? Obviously, you have to make a big bet there. And how do you embrace or use these channels to be where the conversation is, but at the same time still have a relevant offer, which I'm sure it must have been in your brainstorming strategic discussion on how to position Politico. So tell us where is the position?
Yeah, you touch on so many important things, and I think Dave and Tara are doing really well. And for people who've been able to build up a strong personal brand, you buy yourself the opportunity to go to a Substack or a YouTube or another platform and to just go independent. And it's an absolute hard slog. Like, I've watched Tara go through the financial struggle of building the Tara Palmieri show, and it's a big success now, but it wasn't something that was very financially comfortable in the beginning, and that that's just not something a lot of people can afford to do. So I don't think it's a path for everyone, and it's different in different markets. Like in the US, you've got a lot more people to play for. And Dave's been around a very long time in Brussels and across Europe, and he's done that in print and on television. So, he is able to do something there that many people would fail at if they tried. So I don't think that's the path forward for everybody. I do think that, I try and remind myself that when I wrote my first book in 2006, I really didn't make a lot of money out of it, because you don't make a lot of money out of most books. I made more money out of speaking fees. But the book became a kind of credibility threshold that put me in front of other people. And in fact, it's what got me the job with Nelly Cruz.
I was almost what was the book about? Just for our podcast.
It's called Please Just F Off. It's our turn now. And it's about baby boomers and how they should go away and stop owning 5 houses and owning all the cultural capital and staying in the important jobs and not reinventing themselves.
We have to read it.
It's great. It's a great book. And it was on the money for what's happening in Australia. And finally this year, the Australian government implemented one of the housing policies that I recommended in the book. So, eventually you get your way. Anyway, the point was that became a demonstration of my other credentials. And so I made a lot of money, not from the book, by writing the book. And so that's also the point of social media. It's going to take up a lot of time and effort, but it's not as hard as writing a book. And if that is the thing that helps you gain trust with an audience or brings your audience to your actual substantial journalism, then it is a useful extension of the journalism. I've got to say, I feel very tired sort of in advance about having to go through all of that again. But I'm very conscious that I do have to do it as we launch Politico Australia. But it does feel like a lot. And I'm not saying all of this is a young person's game, but if you are someone aged 20 to 35, sort of enjoying this podcast, please take advantage of your energy and use it now, because you won't have as much later on and it gets harder.
Very good advice. Now, but coming back to journalism, I mean, how do you see journalism being transformed and those classic properties, Politico, FT, BBC, whatever established brand, and then those personal brands, along with the channels, TikTok, Instagram, X. So how do you integrate the two?
Yeah.
Sorry?
Well, it's not even about integrating it. It's that when people have so many other options, you have to be better at your job. Like, I look back at some of the stuff we were doing in 2015, and I'm not saying it was bad, but it was looser than the stuff I was doing when I left Politico in 2023. It was, I mean, I'm going to hold myself to a higher standard in 2026 when we launch Canberra Playbook than the standard I felt I delivered in 2015 in Brussels. And now there's ups and downs with that. Like, you don't want to lose your voice. And, like, if you want to make sure you're someone who can't be replaced by AI, then you have to have something different to say. You have to have some unique perspective on the world. And if you just box yourself up and fit yourself into labels and other people's expectations, including those of how to succeed on a social media platform, then you're ultimately not going to succeed as a journalist, because you're not going to have anything important to communicate. But, I think that we've always said at Politico, and we definitely said it at Axios when I was there, like, you can basically say most things in half the number of words that they're usually communicated in. And social media is a kind of ultimate distillation of that principle. It's forcing you to boil your idea or your reporting down to its absolute essence. Sometimes I think that's a bit extreme, like the idea that you have 1.5 seconds to hook somebody. Like, it might be true, it's still depressing, and I'm never going to think it's not depressing. So, like, there's a little bit of me that's the refusenik in all of this. But there's still a lot of positives to gain from being connected to new audiences and challenging your own assumptions and thinking about which parts of your journalism really matter.
Yeah, I mean, the 1 second hook was kind of invented by journalism with the headline. I mean, it's like, can you grab your audience with a great title? And, in
Yes.
some journalistic places,
Fair
things that land on Mars have been, that's how you get people to read about some random piece of news. Now, you talked about AI, which is obviously, the topic of the flavor of the year, let's say, or the next couple of years. So this is obviously, this is changing everything, and in particular people who deal with words. So it's introducing massive amounts of content, described sometimes as slop. So first of all, how are you personally experiencing the AI revolution transformation? How is it touching Politico, and how do you think it's affecting the media landscape?
Yep. I mean, this is very real, and it's going to touch different industries differently, and it's going to shape or replace humans in different tasks differently. So I'm not saying it's like an even experience or that it's happening exactly the same way in every geography at the same time. But I am sufficiently convinced by its power that I went to begin the AI coverage of Axios, the AI Plus newsletter. Then I went to go and work at an AI startup. And so, like, I think this is very real, and I use AI every single day. and we will use AI in the workflows of what we're building here in Australia. Now, that does not mean we are using AI to draft newsletters and articles. We're not doing that. My personal perspective on it is that AI is pretty much a terrible first draft for anything important. There are situations where it's okay, like it doesn't matter. But if you are trying to communicate a really serious story and do serious journalism, AI would be a terrible thing to use for your first draft. Now, AI can do very, very useful things in your research process. It can help you spot weaknesses in your argument. It could identify patterns where you're using adjectives that are too strong for the evidence that you've gathered in the story that you've written. So AI, I think, can be a very important kind of like, if not a second draft, a very important sort of safety net and checking process in what you do. But AI should not be used as a shortcut. Like, it's not a shortcut in the end. It's either just going to generate stuff that isn't as good as you, isn't as interesting as you, or because you don't know how to use it well, it is going to generate errors in what it produces. And so, buyer beware, you shouldn't be using it to do your journalism. But if you're not using it as part of your whole day as a journalist, then you're missing out, and that's going to become increasingly clear.
Yeah, I think in the corporate world, it's interesting because, before AI, you had a lot of corporate communication which sounded like it came out of a drone. It was like ChatGPT before ChatGPT. So it's a little ironic because when people say, "Oh my God, the world is being flooded by terrible copies," like, just read a corporate brochure from the 90s or the 2000s. It's not written by a poet. It's written by somebody who's just saying. So I mean, I think that, to be honest, in that space, I'm not sure. I think people complain about slop, but it's perhaps content. But in terms of tone, I don't think we're going to see a huge transformation. In journalism, of course, it's completely different, since it's supposed to be the essence of the journalist to bring you a story. But and you said, you don't want it to be used for certain things. But how do you think it's actually being used right now, and how is it already changing the landscape?
That's honestly hard to say, because I was out of journalism for 2 years. So I haven't watched across newsrooms as people struggled with that. I have access to an enterprise ChatGPT account and an enterprise Claude account. So that's what I use. But it's a bit strange because I'm here in Australia on my own at the moment. We've just hired a team. They're starting in 2 weeks, but I am not even working with that team at this point. So I am my own little isolated, kind of not very relevant case study for this. But, there is a lot of drudge work in building a playbook. And if you're trying to be very comprehensive, AI can be very useful in scanning all the sources that you need to be checking in on. Like building a calendar of what's happening tomorrow in Brussels or Canberra, like, a human doesn't need to do all of that. Like, AI can be involved in that. That's not a threat to journalism ethics. It's not a threat to anybody, and at the end of the day, what's really important, whether you're talking about national AI laws or how your team uses and governs AI, at the end of the day, humans are responsible for the output. So if something bad goes wrong, you cannot go and blame the computer. It's your job to manage what goes in and then what gets published. And you have to take responsibility for that. And that is true whether you're using the AI or not. And anyone that doesn't make you take responsibility is not a serious media outlet.
Yeah. Now, there's a space. I mean, if you worked in the kind of cutting edge of AI as well, and one area that people talk about a lot is the personalization of information. So imagine that you had a playbook, but that could be custom more and more to you. That could be read out to you in a human sounding voice. I mean, that's already a feature. So we're talking, and podcasts obviously can't replace people, but Notebook LM and other features are doing something that sounds a lot like a podcast. So we can imagine it coming quickly. So are you going to use some of these tools to bring new perspectives on information? Do you have any kind of...
I think we'll see a future with Politico where people are getting a personalized version of Politico, driven by what they've said they're interested in. And that is another form of curation, and like humans would always be involved in that. And you might argue that maybe it's just a lame version of what social media companies do with their algorithms. But I think the difference there is we're not going to sort of, we're just giving you the bits of Politico that we think you'd be most interested in, rather than shoving users that you never asked to be connected to into your feed. Like, we're not doing that, or we wouldn't be doing that in the future. And then that's different from something like a playbook, where the point is you're joining the community. You're joining the one conversation. So there's no point giving everyone a personalized playbook, because then it's that you're defeating the purpose of bringing people together, because you're not bringing them together. But they weren't coming together as they were scrolling your website. So like you haven't lost anything by giving people the personalized version of Politico there. So like there's going to be different uses of AI in different situations, and that's okay. Like if AI was going to take over everything, well, we all may as well go home. So I don't want it to take over everything. And there are just lots of things that we'll never be able to do. And that's also why I don't believe in the AI apocalypse, robots coming to take us over. It's just like, what a stupid idea. Like, if it was ever going to get like that, we would just protest and cut the cords. Like, we'd melt them so that the AI couldn't take over. Like, it's just not going to happen. And like, we're decades away from AI even being able to load a dishwasher. So I just don't believe any of that stuff about AI is going to ruin the world.
Now, you said, people's extreme forms of personalization end up, with your own filter bubble, which is basically your social media feed.
Yeah.
Now, that filter bubble, that discussion about what you see has been a huge conversation. And, the big topic obviously has been polarization. And the question is, can we still have a civil conversation when we stand at opposite ends of the political spectrum? Now, 10 years ago, when you were in Brussels, and it's interesting how you talked about Politico, because people were talking about EU in a relatively boring way. It was, okay, policy, and you wanted to bring the stories, the emotion, the people, which is also what social media did, because it does get engagement, but it also creates polarization and extremes. So maybe to continue my analysis, maybe you introduced those polarizations, and then suddenly things got out of hand. Now, you've been in the US, you've been in Brussels, but my first question is, from the political perspective, do you see the extreme polarization in the US and in Europe? Was it very different? Do you think that we're still having a different conversation, or is the whole world getting polarized and extreme, and we're all going to have our little filter bubbles? Or is sane conversation between people who fundamentally disagree still possible?
There's a lot to unpack there. I would say that lots of the extreme and crazy things that get surfaced today were always there. What's different with something like sort of a network of social platforms and networks is that the kind of stuff that used to just be a weird conspiracy theory in a little pocket of your neighborhood can scale globally now. And that's different because of these technologies. And that is a problem. I think that Europeans are much better at getting along with each other, which doesn't mean that there are no blind spots. Like, there are major blind spots across Europe. Like, we didn't see the class-based impacts of much of globalization. Like, there is incredible blindness to like how deep racism is in parts of Europe. So I'm not saying there aren't problems and little echo chambers and ghettos of conversation and things like that, but people don't kind of lock in and hate on each other in the same way that I witnessed in the US, where like there is a literal polarization in the sense of the two parties, because there isn't really two parties in Europe. So there's nothing to polarize to in the same way in Europe, is what I would say. And I think that because Europe's been shaped by lots of different forces, different from the US, like it's been shaped by war, it's been shaped by being the home of welfare states and so on. Like it's just kind of a different culture of discussion. And that doesn't mean the EU kind of gets it right. The EU is too far removed from a lot of people's lives, and that's how it's gotten into trouble a lot of the time when it has. But there's a much kind of calmer public conversation in Europe, is what I would say. And that was true before social media. It's still true even after 15 years of social media. And in the US, it's not that people can't be civil with each other, but they're much more driven. It's much more transactionally driven. Like even if somehow there is a transaction going on in Europe, it's much less blatant than, everything is a sales pitch and a transaction in the US. And it was founded on this kind of like more entrepreneurial, individualistic version of capitalism compared to Europe, I would say generally. And that, I really, really noticed that difference having spent like a long time in both of them.
And I don't know how closely connected you stayed to the EU conversation, but there's a lot of talk about, obviously post-Brexit and Russia, the war in Ukraine. And there's the constant questions like, is this institution still relevant? Is it going to fall apart? And is it going to, are the extremes going to come forward and destroy it? Are you optimistic about the future of the EU project? The vision of the positive, maybe rainbows and unicorns and the good things about it? Or are you worried? I don't know how do you have a strong view on that?
Yeah, I am positive. And I always was, having worked on the inside. And I would watch these people talk about how the euro was going to crumble. And I was like, it's not going to crumble. Like, there's way too much riding on it. People have far too much that they've invested to let it crumble. And the institutions are well constructed, even if they are a bit removed from everyday people. And then Brexit taught everybody a lesson about how important it was to actually work together. Now, am I like disappointed as a Belgian voter and kind of disappointed as a journalist that tries to make sure people are performing to high standards? Like, yes, like it is absolutely bonkers to me that the single market, the crowning achievement of the EU, is basically this 1/3 completed shell. Like, it's like never really touched services seriously. There's always some excuse to not complete the work there. Like, it's barely getting into the data and AI age. Like, we've just entirely missed the 60% of the economy that is services. Like, that's just absolutely insane to me. Like, it is just clear you should put an army of people on solving that problem, and whatever the difficult politics are, go away, find compromises and common ground and move forward on the bits you can move forward on. But even having said all of that, like, I don't think it's going to fall apart anytime soon. The EU is just being suboptimal, let's say. Like, it could achieve more, and it's not achieving it all. But what I've said from the day I turned up in Brussels, like, the EU is a lot cheaper than a war, and that is always going to be true. And that's why it's going to stick around.
But the defense funding is getting more expensive, which, hopefully...
Still cheaper than a war. Like, wait till you spend 20% of your GDP on a war against Russia or China or somebody else or each other. What an absolute mess. Never mind the 20 million people that will die. Terrible, terrible idea. EU is so much better.
Now, in this chaotic world and with all this uncertainty, when you meet people who come up to you and say, what is your advice for starting my career? Like, we're talking about young students or even people thinking about what to study in the age where AI will do all your studies for you and things like that. So what is your wise advice to young people? What do they need to focus on? What are the core skills and values they need to hang on to?
Be extremely open-minded and don't spend too much money on your degree, is what I would say. Like, I think unless you're super committed to a particular degree, I'd even caution people who are sort of 17 and 18 to think about, hang on, take a year off and don't just do like a gap year, but do a year of kind of YouTube University, of figuring out kind of all the free stuff that is out there, all the AI tutorials that you can do, including from leading institutions, and then figure out how much do you actually need that degree. Now, I think on balance, for the sort of people listening to this podcast, the sort of people who want to get involved in EU life or policy in some way, probably you are still going to need a degree. But it is certainly not worth going and spending $200,000 or something like that and mortgaging your life or your parents' future to go to some expensive American university. I would definitely not recommend that. And the thing that's really worked for me in my life is sort of not getting depressed when things don't work out. I ended up in Brussels because I went to go work on a political campaign in Australia for 4 months. I got fired. I felt like my effort to return to Australia was a total disaster. The first thing I could apply for was this job in Brussels. I was embarrassed by my job application. I actually tried to withdraw it, and then they begged me to not withdraw it because they were like, "You're going to get this job, don't withdraw it." But I was like, I'm not qualified for this job, basically. And I know that can be a problem in particular for female candidates where they feel like they shouldn't put themselves forward or that they're not ready for something. And then basically the best thing I ever did was go to Brussels and do a job I wasn't qualified to do, leaving the country that was my home, that I thought I had been doing this great homecoming to. So, like, I could never have predicted the last 20 years of my life. And that was only possible because I stayed open-minded.
So keep an open mind. Now, you said, let's assume some of us listeners have completed that degree in whatever they picked.
Mm-hmm.
What do they now need to build up as skills or capabilities to find something? There is a lot of narrative now, the kind of dominant narrative about, it's very hard to find your first job. It's really hard to get your foot in the door because people are thinking, do I need an intern or do I just go with AI? So what do you do to get in the door? And what do you put forward on the table, and what skills do you build up to be successful in an age where nobody has a clue what's going to be really useful in 3 years from now?
Yeah, that's really tough. So I'm not going to pretend I have the answers there. But the people who've always impressed me when they approached me for a job were the people who kind of like knew why they were approaching me. They had kind of really thought about it. They weren't approaching 50 people in the town. They were thinking about who are the 2 or 3 people that, they're really interested in for one reason or another. Or they've thought, I love this brand. Like the classic case is Zoya Sheftalovich, who's the chief EU correspondent now for Politico. She did what is regarded as the best ever application letter for Politico back in 2015. And I didn't know her. She just was like, a friend in Sydney was like, oh, there's this Australian woman in Brussels. Like, you should meet her for a coffee. And by accident, we started talking about that I was going to join Politico. And she was like, I used to be a journalist. And then she wrote this amazing application letter about her love affair with Politico back to 2008. And it was just like, it was just clear that she really cared about this organization and that she really understood it. And when you can communicate that sort of understanding, people have to pay attention. And, it's tough. Like, you kind of like, it's tricky. Like, you shouldn't go around stalking people, but you should be persistent. And if people see you in enough places or in surprising places, it's going to stand out. And I remember doing that back as a 17 and 18-year-old as a first-year university student. I was like, I'm really interested in Australia becoming a republic, and I don't just want to lick envelopes in some campaign office. So I'm going to go to these constitutional conferences in like random towns in Australia. And I would have to like take trains overnight and then buses the next morning. And then I would just like pop up in front of one of my lecturers and be like, oh, hi, Helen. Here I am in this random Australian town showing you how committed I am. And that can be a bit crazy. And I'm not saying it's easy or cheap. But the point was, like, I had really thought about it. And if I decided I wanted it, I was like all in on it. And I think that really matters. And, only humans can be that unreasonable and that passionate. And that really stands out. Like, if you're just sending off letters based on LinkedIn ads, you've already lost. It's not working. You've got to find other ways in.
Yeah, no, I really like that. I think, I think it's about stories. It's basically, what is the story you can bring to the employer or the person that you want to work with, and not, I'm a great team player and I have all the skills, but more, I've looked at what you're doing. I think I can help. I've got some crazy ideas. I really thought about, and that you genuinely think about it. And as you said, meeting people in Brussels actually is surprisingly easy. With about 1 billion events per minute, you just turn up. Most of them are open. You have to sit through some very painful long presentations from officials, but then you get to shake hands with people and meet them. So I think that's very good. But the other thing, as you said,
food and the drink are free. So
that's true.
However annoying the rent is, or the train trip to Brussels for the day is, like, there's ways to offset those costs if you're sneaky about it.
just bring a bag and put all the sandwiches in there.
Do it. Like, they have more money than you do. So don't be ashamed. Just go take it.
Absolutely. But yeah, and I think this idea of, not sending a generic application, I received those and they're just diabolical. It's like,
And
here's
don't
a
be
letter.
afraid to say if you would have done it better or what you would have done. Like, you can't be rude, and that's a fine line. Like, people would watch the way I would write or speak when I was doing Brussels Playbook, and they would be like, "Oh, but Ryan's sassy like that," and then I would watch them do it and be like, "Oh, that's just no." I was doing it from a place of love, and you just come across as an asshole. So you've got to be careful about how you do it. But lots of people are busy, or lots of people wish they had a more clever person doing that annoying task for them. And if you can show them that you would have done it better, or that you have a really interesting thought process that, maybe isn't perfect, but shows a lot of potential, then that's the best job application, is having that original thought and being able to communicate it.
Recommendations of the week.
So now you have a couple of recommendations for our audience. So what is your recommendation as a book and a TV show, I believe?
Yeah, book. One book is called Moral Ambition by Rutger Bregman. And if you don't know him, you might have heard of him when he took on a bunch of people in Davos at the World Economic Forum a few years ago, basically saying, we should just tax people more. There's lots of things that are actually morally corrupt in our systems. And it doesn't matter whether you literally agree with that analysis or not. I thought he was a very brave person with clarity in his thinking about how to take that message directly to the people who were the source of the problem that he had identified. And his book kind of goes through to try and help you understand how you can kind of make choices that you can live with in your life and in building a career. And it's not telling you what choice to make, but it's saying okay, figure out what these parameters and red lines are in for you, so that you end up in a place that you can live with and be passionate about. And I haven't got to the end of the book yet, but I thought that was a better one to recommend than all these books about Canberra, the bush capital, things happening in Canberra that no one will understand.
And your TV recommendation?
Oh my God, all the way, Hacks. I know it might be a bit harder to stumble across in Europe, but it's made by HBO Max in the US. And it's just this extraordinary series where the lead character is a woman in her 70s, a comedian, played by Jean Smart, who I knew from shows in the 1980s. And I always wondered, why didn't she go on to do other big things, and whatever happened to Jean Smart sort of thing. And she's had this sort of renaissance in her 70s where she's won several Emmys for her work in this show. And it's a show where she gets paired in this odd couple style with a young bisexual writer who made some bad joke on some show and gets cancelled. And she's forced to go deal with this woman who she thinks is a dinosaur, who doesn't know how to make funny jokes, who, her stand-up is all about oh my God, my husband left the toilet seat up, and just stupid out-of-date stuff. And then it's this wild ride over 5 seasons about what you can learn from people who are not like you, and how the underdogs can win if they work together with a strategy. And it's just this unlikely cast of characters across Las Vegas and Hollywood. And I just love it because it's so heartwarming and heartbreaking. And I love an underdog story. So I will always recommend those sorts of things.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. It's been fantastic hearing from you, Ryan, and really very interesting trip down memory lane and some great insights and some recommendations for our younger audience that is looking for opportunities. So thank you very much. See you online. Maybe see you in Brussels next time you're dropping by.
I am. I'm buying an apartment in Brussels, so I am not giving up my life in Brussels, I promise you. So
please,
hopefully I'll be back pretty soon.
Write down the September the 18th, because that's when we have our EU influencer ranking event. And if you're there, I would love to have you on stage sharing your thoughts on that past decade. So keep me posted.
I will pencil it in. Everyone else should be there for sure, September 18.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Have a fantastic day. Bye for now.
Bye, Philip. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much for watching this episode of the ZNL podcast. Did you like it? If so, please share it on your social media, subscribe, and give us a comment. We will see you again on the next episode. Until then, remember, stay always one step ahead.
you.